What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Spark to Fire. I'm your host, Landon Rhodes, and before we get today's episode going, I just wanted to remind you guys to please leave us a written review on iTunes and a 5-star rating so we can get more great people on the show. That's how we move up in rankings, and we love hearing from the audience to see how the episodes have changed their life, so please leave us a review moving forward. And on today's episode, I have Vicki Kraai from VK Solutions in the studio. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, I get to know you a little bit from my aunt. My aunt got us connected from your guys' time in the banking world together. And so you run VK Solutions, but before we talk about VK, I want to specifically talk a little bit about, what were you like as a kid? What were some of the inspiration for you becoming an entrepreneur with VK Solutions?
Well, thanks, Landon. I grew up not too far from your aunt. Grew up in Sutton, Nebraska, so a rural community, ag community. And I was pretty business focused. I was that kid that was probably always thinking 5 to 10 years ahead. And now I have a daughter who does the same thing. Yeah. And so my focus was to go off to college. And honestly, I grew up in a family bank. And so I think there was just the intention that she would come back and run the family bank. And interestingly enough, I had no desire.
Yep.
I wanted to be in business. I wanted to be in banking. I wanted to go off to the big town of Lincoln, Nebraska, and really shed small town living.
Right.
So that's what I did. I went off to college and decided to work, got a job at a bank. That's where I met your aunt. Mm-hmm. And spent about 10 years in credit card lending after graduating from college.
Gotcha. And so where at specifically for our listeners, because there's lots of local listeners and
it was the former NBC, National Bank of Commerce, which was sold several years ago to Wells Fargo. Great family bank. The Stewart family was wonderful to their employees, wonderful to the community, great experience. I was honored to be there for 10 years. One of the most exciting things we did was we were awarded the opportunity to launch the Cabelas credit card.
Right.
So we had gone up against a lot of regional banks to bid on that project, and I was on the management team that helped launch that program.
Yeah, that must have been wild because I remember, so we were indoctrinated by Sue and that Cabelas was everything. When we were growing up, we would get awesome gifts, from Cabelas and everything from her and from the rest of the family. And it was like the coolest thing. It was because it was a Nebraska business, but it was just so larger than life from what I remember about Cabelas. And the great part about Cabelas, like the lifeblood of everything of why they became so big, to my understanding, was because of the credit card, which is something you guys helped launch. So I remember you talking to me about this a little bit earlier. It sounded like it had some explosive growth. So talk about like the difference between when you started.
I was in charge of the credit approval process for NBC.
Yeah.
So just for applications coming in and from our outstate banks as well, because we did correspondent applications. But we were used to processing about 1,000 applications a month. So we're all done manually. You take a look at a matrix and you decide whether you're going to approve or deny them. So, we could all handle the volume. It was pretty easy. Mm-hmm. With Cabelas, we knew with what the marketing team was doing, we had to prepare ourselves to actually, and that's what we did, is we had to go from 1,000 applications a month to 1,000 applications a day. So we had to come up with automation. We had to come up with automatic approvals, automatic denials, and only look at physically a portion of them. Right. Otherwise, we couldn't have kept up. So dive in, put in a scorecard, and in 3.5 months, we put on 76,000 accounts. Thus, that was the birth of the Cabelas credit card. It was a lot of fun. We had great success with it. You saw how great it became. Years later, sold to Capital One, or it became its own foremost bank. Mm-hmm. I didn't stay after 1998. I had to go back to the family bank. But what a great product. What a great career opportunity to be a part of a team that launched something like that.
And it was pretty, there was a lot of women that were helping with that process. It was pretty women dominated specifically, wasn't it? And like from a managerial standpoint?
We had our manager and our coach was a male, but the majority of our team were comprised of females. And same thing, we were all about the same age. He really empowered us. He would coach us. I had a great culture to work in.
Yeah.
Sometimes people can't say that in their first job. He really believed in all of us and worked with us even individually. And so it was fun to see us all work together as a team. Not a lot of toxicity there, a great culture. And you don't appreciate that until you get into a situation where it isn't like that. So
yeah, what made it great outside of the one-on-one coaching piece of it? I mean, what specifically, if our listeners could take away from this, if they're they're running a business and say there's regardless if it's men or women working together, what helps create that great culture for you?
I didn't learn some of these concepts till later in life, but when I look back, I think what we all did was identify what our fit was on the team. Mm-hmm. It wasn't all about one person. Whoever has the strengths, you should let them take lead with that. And don't be afraid to identify the fact that these are my strengths, but also these are the areas that I'm not as good in. And so let's let somebody else shine. Right. And so when I look back, being, and I'll talk about this later, but being an ideal team player is so key to any organization. And that's what he instilled in us. Tom Boatman, he's no longer with us. He's since passed. He developed a culture that we all wanted to be a successful part of the team.
Right. Yeah, I remember hearing about that actually, specifically because I remember Sue talking so highly of him specifically as well. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
And so you left from that point when this is far before it sold to Capital One, but you went back to the family bank.
I went back to the family bank. And again, if you remember, I said I had no desire to go back to rural Nebraska, town of 1,400 people.
So what was the impetus for that, first of all?
The no desire?
No. That'd be an interesting topic too, but what caused you to go back?
Okay.
After you had
no
desire?
the bank hadn't survived the 80s very well. And so like many small town banks in Nebraska and any of the Midwest, they were struggling to survive. Some banks didn't survive the 80s.
And for younger listeners, like break that down. Why? What was going on? Farm crisis.
So farmers were being forced to go out of business, and banks were foreclosing on farming. And it was a tough time because if banks didn't have enough capital and they continued to have losses from farm losses, I mean, many banks went under.
Right.
And so our bank was one that it wasn't in a very good position, and it hadn't come out of the 80s very well. And so it was in trouble. I mean, we were on a regulatory enforcement, and the next step would have been literally to shut the bank down. And I didn't know it was as bad as it was. I had a good family friend in banking that came to me one day in my office in Lincoln and said, "Do you know the condition that is going on back home?" And so I'm always a fixer by nature. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I do.
Yeah.
Learn sometimes that you can't fix certain people, certain situations. So I thought, you know what? We have nowhere to go but up. I'm going to go help, see if there's anything that I can do. And initially, I thought I would just go offer consultative advice and kind of go back and forth from Lincoln. Mm-hmm. But I quickly learned not a good setting. Remember I said earlier about this great team environment.
You got to see what great felt like.
Yeah, I got to see what great looked like. And then I was walking back into something actually that was very toxic. Mm-hmm. There was not trust. There was some dishonesty going on. We had the wrong people in the seats on the bus, and to the point that some of them needed to be helped off the bus.
Right. Yep. Let off.
Yeah. And and so I came back, didn't really have any intention on becoming the president of the bank. Really didn't. It ended up happening that we needed a president at the time. And I think by default, it was like, well, let's have Vicki do it. And I remember someone saying, I said to one of my good friends, I said, I do not have the skill set to be president of the bank. And they said, right now, a green president with eagerness and willingness to learn is going to be better than anything.
Yep.
And so I dove in. But what I quickly learned is, I had really established at Cabelas, at NBC, I'd established the fact that I was good at certain things. When I came back to the community, pretty conservative community, and I think the community members and other people in the bank are the only reason she's here is because her family owns the bank. Right. And that was a huge hurdle for me because I was always someone that I didn't care about status.
And you took your job really seriously.
I took my
loved
job
your job.
seriously, and I wanted to help. I wanted to help the family bank.
Mhm.
And so I guess I just refused to say, yeah, this may be a man's world right now. And that's what I really jumped back into, was a man's world. I was probably one of 3 in the state of Nebraska that was a female president.
One of 3.
Yeah,
And how many banks
3 or 4.
How many banks are there in Nebraska?
A lot more than that.
Yeah.
Probably about, at the time, there was probably about 150 to 175 community banks.
Yeah. And you knew that going into it, just from being in a larger regional bank in Lincoln, right?
Right. And you know what? You can decide that that's going to be your challenge and let it consume you. Or you can say, you know what? I'm going to rise above it, and I'm going to show them that I'm going to surround myself with people that can help me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just been my philosophy through everything. I'm not afraid to stand up and say, I don't know how to do something. And so I knew in order to successfully bring our bank out of financial trouble, I had to surround myself with people that had the skill sets that I didn't have. And I welcomed that.
Right. No, that's huge. Being able to drop the ego and say, hey, no idea what to do on this, need your help.
Vulnerability and trust. And I've learned, and I train on that now all the time with my clients, is if you don't have your own vulnerability and you can't establish that basis of trust, your culture's never going to get to where you want it to be. And no one's ever going to want to work in your culture either.
No, definitely not. And what happened after you became president of that bank? What happened after that?
We had some tough decisions to make.
Yeah.
There were people that were in the organization that needed to be gone.
And you were now in a position of power to do something about it.
Mm-hmm. We had to convince regulators that we really could improve the performance of the bank. And so again, you don't argue with them. You actually work alongside them.
Show them and then give them numbers and say, hey, here's how we're going to do it.
And even from a customer perspective, I still look back and I love the community of Sutton. And it was a great place to spend 10 years before we sold the bank in 2009. Just the conservative nature, again, the whole male-female thing, would happen from time to time. And I could decide that that's going to put a chip on my shoulder, or I could just, embrace it. And so we'd have farmers or customers that would come in, and if one of the male lenders wasn't available, there was no way they would talk to me about their loans. They would talk to me about their deposits and maybe, to make invest in a CD.
Right.
But when it came to lending and personal financial statements, they didn't want to have anything to do with me. And I'm like, I'm fine with that.
Right.
On the flip side, I was encouraged by females that would come in and they would want to start up a business, and they had a business idea and they were intimidated to go talk to one of the male loan officers.
A male loan officer. Yeah.
And so I was able to, visit with them, and someone may say, well, Vicki, this isn't it isn't a male-female thing. You know what? In reality, in a lot of our industries, that male-female thing still really does exist.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I just encourage people to don't allow it to define you, and to continue to do things that you are capable of.
Yeah.
To move forward.
Well, and with money so cheap right now, I think that's really important for some of our, some of the female bosses listening right now to hear, like, money's cheap right now. You can go get a loan. You need to go be doing these things, especially if you're thinking about starting a business.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that that's got to be one hurdle that they're looking at, is like, well, what if I look, and like, I even had this male to male. I even had this, like, what if I look like an idiot when I go apply for the loan? And so I'm sure it works both ways, but at the end of the day, you have to put that aside and go after it. You can't let something like that stop you from going after your dreams. So you're back home. You are now letting people go. I'm sure you're making a lot of friends doing that, right?
Right.
What's some of the feedback you're getting from the other employees at the bank?
The employees, I quickly did. I think I wanted to build that. I wanted to be vulnerable in front of them, and I wanted to build that trust, because I had some really good people there, and I wanted them to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent, I think, early on more time asking than I did telling. You don't just walk in and make sweeping changes. You need to get to know what are the things that are going on. And so I wasn't afraid to sit behind the teller line and just really dig in and ask, for their feedback, ask for their input. In fact, I got criticized sometimes by maybe doing that a little too much. And I thought, if that's what's going to happen, then I ask too many questions. I'm good with that.
They don't realize that you could go the opposite direction like that, though.
Right.
Those people that are criticizing you for that, I don't think they truly understand the value of being asked by their boss the best way to do something, because you're effectively making them the expert at that point.
And it was hard because things were being said out in the community about, the changes I was making. And of course, confidentiality, I've grown up with that all my life. I mean, you just can't cross that line.
Right.
I can't share some things that I would have liked to have shared. Trust me and get to know me again now as an adult back here. And I promise you, I'm in the best interest of the bank. I'm doing this for the best interest of the employees. And you know what? At the end of the day, I love Sutton, and I wouldn't have spent as much time there. So I really cared about the community.
Yeah. And did you have a lot of people coming at you and saying, well, what do you know? You left us, or like, was there a lot of that going on too, of say, you don't care about us. You were in Lincoln for this long, or?
I didn't really see that. If that did happen, it was more so, does she really have the skill set to run a bank? Right. And I think the female card really did exist. And I was young. I was 30. I didn't set up to go do this, but I felt like I needed to come back and help the best I could. But I also surrounded myself with good people. And I'd say all of them were men.
Yeah.
I needed help from people that could do some of the things that I didn't have a skill set for.
And so you turn the bank around, you sell it in 2009. And what was that like, going through the process of building something back up from the grave, basically, and making the sale?
I mean, it was fun. I did that with my dad and my mom, and we chose to go select a few banks that we had an interest in selling to, because we cared about the community, we cared about the employees. We weren't just going to sell to the highest bidder.
Right.
So I think we took great pride in how we did that selection process, and it was time. It was time for us. Our family lived in Hastings when I ran the bank for 10 years. So my kids didn't have a connection to Sutton like I did. When you start looking at succession planning, I think it was the right thing for us to do.
Right.
I don't know that Dad ever regretted it either. And so it was good timing for us. And yeah, we haven't looked back and said, no, I wish we would have done something different.
Right.
And I still think the community's in good hands today.
Yeah. And you go back now, you get done selling the bank, and you go back to, from what I understand, you went back and tried to get a job, or tried to propose your way into a job, right?
Right. After we sold the bank, we moved back to Lincoln after a while. And I knew I loved training and education of bankers, and just training and education of individuals, growing them in their skill sets. But still, that conservative nature of, I've been a banker all my life. I've worked at a place, and you work so many hours, and this is what your benefits package looks like. So yeah, I went to one of my banking friends and I said, I'm going to propose that I go to work for you. Here's what I think I should do. Here's what I think I could help you with. And, he was very kind. He smiled, and then he took that piece of paper and he pushed it over back to me. He says, this is great, but you're not going to work for me. You're going to start your own business, your own consulting business, and we will be one of your first customers.
Were you shocked at that point? Like, what was going through your mind when he pushed that paper back?
I'm great at giving other people advice. Sometimes it's hard for me to see the writing on the walls. Is like, this is what you need to be doing.
Right.
And so I needed that push. And that was 2010, and I haven't looked back since. And I guess the love of what I do is educate and train people. I find them where they are, want to help develop their strengths and their skill sets. I primarily do this in the bank and credit union world, but honestly, a lot of the things that I do can really apply to any type of leadership development and training.
Right.
and customer service experience.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that too. The heart of looking at the business from the outside, right? Being able to secret shopper your way into a customer experience, I think is really important. We talked about how you've done that. So I know that you've actually advised people to go do a little bit of that, but I want you to talk a little bit more about VK Solutions. Talk about what things you're specifically working with banks on to help them.
The main, I love to do anything related to leadership training. I like to develop people into good leaders. We hire or we promote someone to a manager, and then we don't train them. Mm-hmm. Or they sign someone up for a class. It says, here, I've done leadership training. Now I'm done. And leadership training, in my mind, and being an effective manager isn't a once and done thing. You just don't go to training, get a certificate, and you're done. It's an ongoing process. And I think those that are good at it realize the fact that they always need to continue to learn and grow in their role. Jack Welch says it best, the former CEO of GE Electric. He said, when you were promoted to a leader, you weren't given a crown.
Right.
You were given the responsibility to bring out the best in others.
Yep.
And I think that's the passionate piece that I love in leading and managing training, is letting people see they need to see themselves through the lens of their employees. And the better they do that, the better they're going to be vulnerable with their team, but also develop that trust.
And how do you advise people to do that? How do you advise them to be vulnerable with their employees, especially, and put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's in a really rugged industry, not even the ad agency world? Think construction, think dirt moving. How is somebody supposed to go about being vulnerable with their employees that way?
I have a couple of exercises that I work with on people, and I will tell you, I went into a similar situation, and I was very intimidated. So I'm out of my realm.
Yeah, this isn't a bank.
This isn't a bank, and I see that this group really isn't getting along very well. Very dominated manager, and it was completely out of my wheelhouse. I'm like, I'm going to do this. And we did some things with personality assessments, and I'm a big fan of those. But even if people don't get into those, at the end of the day.
Do you have a favorite, by the way, before I cut you off?
Well, I like two of them. I like Drake. Drake P3 is a great assessment profile tool. DISC is another one.
Okay, DISC.
That
We've all
really
taken
like.
DISC here too. So
yeah,
that's cool.
And so what I encourage people to do is we don't sit around the table and we talk about well, Landon, here's what you need to work on. Rather, this can be so life changing for people. Is we all have to write down for the whole team. Write down what strengths that each one brings to the team. So you write down everybody else's name. And then you give me what are two strengths that Landon brings to the table. Right. And then everybody gets to go around and share. And all of a sudden you see this, that, oh, wow, I have team members that actually think that I have a strength that I bring to the team. And then we ask them after that. So we've gone through, everything's positive, right? We're focused on what we think you're really good at. What are some of our team challenges? Not you. What's your problem?
Right.
It's what are some of our team challenges? What do we struggle with because of how we work and how our culture is? And then suddenly you see kind of those barriers start breaking down. And that, you know what? Well, if so-and-so's good at, has real high patience level, why don't we let that person work with the customers that are very challenging? Don't give it to Landon, because we're seeing that his patience level is way down here.
You're reading me pretty well. This is pretty accurate.
I haven't even seen your profile yet.
No, but and it's DI, right? For anybody who understands like the DISC assessment, that's what it is. And that's obvious, it's just the way that I come across. I think it's pretty, like, if you had to guess, it's a pretty safe guess on it. But there's somebody in that support seat that's going to be phenomenal at dealing with, like you said, that tough customer all day long. Will answer 200 questions, never once just like lose their cool or anything. That's really important.
And then build
too.
Those people up in front of the rest of the team. If they're doing something that is that you're really excited about because they're doing a nice job, make sure and shout it out so people hear that affirmation. Sometimes we just tend to go on to whatever our next issue is.
Right.
And to me, we've got to take the time, be intentional about recognizing those people, or at least appreciating them, even if it's a one-on-one. And the other, issue I think that I see more and more too is when you promote someone to a manager, they immediately think that they have to do everything themselves. And if you've got someone on your team that has a strength in an area that you're not so good at, give it to them. Let them excel. It's if you embrace your team and work with your team, that's going to reflect on you as the team leader.
Yeah. What else do you do to create vulnerability or like create opportunities for leaders to be vulnerable with their employees?
Another one is if they're willing to do some type of 360 feedbacks.
Right. Yeah.
So being willing to ask those questions.
Give for listeners that don't know, give a brief description on 360. I just had to do one for the first time, by the way, for a friend of mine. So I just
some of them are very formal, and so it can be a formal process where we send out a survey to all of the employees and ask them to rate you in different areas of management. Now that one's very formal. You don't have to go to that process right away if you don't want to. It can be as easy as there's some great ones out there. One of my favorites is Patrick Lencioni.
Okay.
Famous author. I drink his Kool-Aid. I love all of the stuff that he does. And his is just as simple as he's got 3 concepts he talks about. He said the ideal team player needs to have 3 attributes. They need to be humble. They need to be hungry, so have a thirst to just do more. And then they have to be smart. And he doesn't mean that I got a 34 on my ACT. Smart is people smarts.
Right.
How well do you treat people?
Yeah.
How well do you come across in a team? And he describes it a little bit more, but he's got an assessment out there on his website. And you can go around the table with your team and ask everybody to assess what do you think my team members say about me in terms of humble, hungry, and smart? And you score it.
Interesting.
And one of them's going to be your best, and one of them has to be number 3.
Right.
And so number 3 is the one that you probably need to recognize that you maybe need a little bit of work on that. And then to go around the table and we all share that. So I'm going to share which one's what I think I'm the strongest in, and the one that I need the most work in. Right. And then I'm going to ask you as one of my team members, help me in this area. If I want to improve in humble, and I'm running over everybody in the meetings and always have to have the last word, can you call me out on it? Maybe after the meeting, let me know, you know what, Vicki, here's how you came across, and I just didn't know if you're aware of that. Understanding everything through the lens of your employee or the lens of the team member is so key to being an effective leader.
Yeah, that's
so just
phenomenal
I have
advice.
Lots of tools for identifying ways to build that trust, gain that the culture that you want to have within your team.
What other advice would you give young leaders specifically, like myself, who just now got into this position? I've been in it for basically 2 years, and the number of employees grows pretty rapidly now at this point. So just curious, like for myself and people that have just stepped into a management position, leadership position, what do you recommend?
Always be a sponge. Never think that you've gotten to a level that you've can't go any further, because I'm still learning today, and I'm a lot older than you are. So that willingness to just be a sponge, and to also identify someone that you really look up to as a mentor, or someone that you could maybe even ask to be an accountability partner for you. I used to call it surround yourself with a personal board of directors.
Those words have been said on this very podcast. So that's pretty cool. Who was it that Tim Clare said that? Yeah, he said my personal board of directors is made up of lots of different, and choose them in kind of different reasons, choose them in different paths of life. Like you're successful in this area, you're successful in this area. That's been really effective for me too. And I feel like I've subconsciously done that for the last 2 years. So,
and it's someone that needs to provide you honest feedback. It can't be someone that's just going to always praise you for everything. The best thing we can do for our team members is be clear with them, but be honest. And sometimes honest is hard, but we owe it to them to be honest if something, if they're not in the right seat, if this job isn't for them, the worst we can do is just be kind and continue to work around them.
Right. Right. Yeah. That doesn't help them or you.
Both. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've done between like your education, speaking, consultancy, what's it been like for you now being, in this safe corporate bubble sort of situation of having this job to now jumping and being now full time on your own in your own business? What's that been like for you?
It afforded me to do some things from starting the business in 2010 that I wouldn't have been able to do had I been in a full-time position somewhere. Shortly after launching the business, my parents became they're aging parents, and we had to move them to assisted livings, and we had to go through the whole process of the role reversal switch.
Right.
So I became one of the caregivers, and that was hard. So
Right.
I wouldn't recommend that you start a business and take care of aging parents at the
Oh my
same
gosh,
time.
I can't imagine.
But thankfully, I was able to have that flexibility within my schedule to say no to people that I couldn't go do something. I had that flexibility. Not everybody has that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's gonna be pretty difficult. So you had lots of time available. That was obviously really nice. What else have you kind of
And
learned from
I
that
think the
time?
other thing I learned too is I want to work with clients that are passionate about the same things that I am. And so it's okay to not go down a path if you don't think you're good at it. In fact, it's better if you don't. So I've been approached to do different things, and I've admittedly have said, you know what, that's really not my wheelhouse.
Like what? Like
Here's
what's
what it
something? Give me an
is.
example of that.
I spent a couple of projects early on going into troubled institutions, banks, and helping them get out of regulatory enforcements. And that's a tough thing to do.
Which is what you did.
I did it. So I thought, well, yeah, since I did it,
home.
why wouldn't I go help other banks? Well, sometimes when you're working with, family members of banks, and maybe they're part of the problem.
That's what I was just gonna say. There's a reason that
Yeah.
there's always gonna be some sort of a reason why they're in that position in the first place.
It's rewarding, but it's also high stress.
I would imagine. Yeah.
And so I quickly learned that, my more of my passion was individually helping people in leading and managing that customer experience. That was important for me. I wanted people, again, to see people, if you can see your employees through their lens, and same thing, even better yet, if you can see your customers, see everything through the lens of a customer. I think sometimes we would make different decisions on how we train, how we talk to people. We need to think about those things.
Right. Yeah, and you've learned all of this obviously from your long career in banking, and then you're now applying it to your clients. And so you've got clients all over the Midwest, or specifically in Nebraska, or where's your primary base at?
I do a lot of work with banks and credit unions, but banking associations, so across the nation. And they end up being a lot of annual events. And then I even work specifically with banks or credit unions on if they need help with frontline training, or if they want help with professional maturity training. Leading and managing people, training the trainer is going to be kind of one of my new ones now.
How do you train on professional maturity? Like, where do you even start there? Because a lot of people think that like you've got that, you're kind of parented into it, you're a quote old soul, you just know how to. Some people get it, some people don't, sort of thing. So how do you train on that?
Training on it is important, because we with any job, and I know I can talk specifically about banking a lot, but with any job, when someone comes in, our focus is, let's work on your technical skills. Let's make sure you know how to, handle this transaction. You need to balance. There's things that are really, really important that are very job specific. I get that.
Right.
But what we don't train on is how we should treat people. Maybe some guidance in what we should say, what we shouldn't say. Trigger phrases to avoid, maybe phrases that we should use. And when I talk about professional maturity, it's first impressions for any of us that are in the service business are huge. Because when you think of, if I ask you today, who do you think the face of the bank is, or the face of any service industry? Do you know what they're going to tell you? It's the person that's waiting on them every day. They're not going to say it's Vicki who's president of the bank. They're going to say it's the person who greets them at the teller line, who talks to them on the phone or in the drive up.
Right.
And so it's pretty important that we train on professional maturity, because that doesn't come natural for everybody.
Yeah.
And professional maturity is above and beyond appearance.
Mm-hmm.
But appearance is pretty important. And, how you dress sends an important message to a customer, and perception is reality. So we train on appearance, but we also train on communication skills. Nonverbals are almost more powerful than what you say. And so what kind of message are we sending? Because we form an opinion of someone that's going to wait on us in probably less than 11 seconds.
11 seconds.
Think about that when you go into like a retail place. Have you ever been there when your first impression is, you know what? They're standing over there talking. They don't really care that I'm here at all. So those are the things that we have to be aware of. Mm-hmm. Professional maturity is also about good work habits. It's also about portraying a positive attitude, because the perception from the customer is reality. And so if we aren't training on what professional maturity looks like, then I think we're missing the boat. We're focused on technical and tactical items when we need to be talking about the experience.
Yeah, the customer experience of what it's like to work with your firm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's when you get into a commoditized industry, you're selling commoditized products, whatever. That's the thing that's going to set you apart.
Those are defining moments.
Right.
I say this, if another defining moment, not only first impressions, is if a customer comes in and they're upset, and it's how we handle that. And if we don't train on that, if that customer walks out and has a poor experience or a poor resolution, that just gives them an opportunity to go look elsewhere.
Oh, yeah.
On the flip side, if you nail that and own whatever that is, even if it really wasn't your fault, but we've taken care of it and we leave them knowing in their mind they've just been 100% satisfied, that could be a customer for life. But It's a defining moment because it goes either way. And if you don't train on that, not everybody gets it.
And they're going to tell 20 people about their bad experience. They'll tell probably 5 about their good.
Mm-hmm. I always say there's 3 outcomes with a customer experience. They're either going to have an exceptional one that you rock at it and they're going to go tell everybody, or it's going to be awful and they're going to go tell everybody, or it's just going to be average and mediocre. Which one do you want to be?
And you become the commodity at that point. You become one of 100, one of 1,000.
And in many of our industries today, that's where we are. I mean, banks, people have a choice where to bank. And most of our competitors anymore aren't just banks. It's credit unions. Sure. It's the web. It's finance companies. So we have to set ourselves apart in service and the experience.
Yeah.
And we need to train on it.
Right. And who are some of your favorite authors that you said you're constantly educating yourself? Who are some authors you look to when you're looking to build your knowledge base?
Well, I'm a total book nerd, so I have many. Patrick Lencioni is probably my favorite, the author of The Ideal Team Player, The Advantage.
It's the second time I've heard that on this show. Yeah,
one of his newest ones is called The Motive. Uh-huh. Actually, the book The Motive, I love it. It's about why is it you want to lead? Do you want to really lead for the right motive? Do you want to lead for the right reasons, or is it for title alone? Going back to the Jack quote about, you weren't given a crown. Don't put yourself on a pedestal, because that's not going to look pretty to anybody around you.
No. And you're spinning your wheels.
Yeah. Heart-led leadership also is another good book. I have a whole book list. I have a book list. I have a podcast list.
Oh.
Yeah. Cy Wakeman, and she's
I was just gonna bring up
Cy Wakeman. She's here in Nebraska, and I've never met her, and I would love to. I encourage people to subscribe to her YouTube channel and all of her videos, because if you want to learn about having difficult conversations with employees, you got to watch Cy. Mm-hmm. She's like the super nanny. So did you ever watch the show Super Nanny? Super Nanny would come in and help you with your unruly children. Uh-huh. and really teach you parenting skills. So you're going to have to
She
Google
did.
this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Cy Wakeman is the super coach
Mm-hmm.
of having difficult conversations with employees.
One of her favorite, or one of my favorite things that she says in the book No Ego, is they like talking about when someone has a problem and they pull their big shiny BMW and just yelling and bitching right into your office. I think is what her exact words are. And it's just funny. It's, you just imagine like this proverbial car driving into your office and just laying on the horn. and that's basically as distracting as it is. You know, when someone has something that just has to overtake everything that you're working on,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, somebody that's a poor culture fit, they can completely do that. They can just sit there and lay on the horn in the middle of the office. And that's a great example of, because I've seen it happen before. And so that was the one thing that took away from No Ego, Cy Wakeman's book. And that's one of my favorite reads. I bought copies of that game to all my friends that run small companies.
I have that book too. Highly
Mm-hmm.
recommend it. One of her YouTube videos, and it's out there on her YouTube subscription. It's how to re-engage employees that are disengaged. And this was a huge aha moment for me, because I wish I would have known this when I was back in my early years of leading and managing.
Yeah.
And it's you know, someone who's completely disgruntled. It doesn't enjoy being a part of the team. But what do most of us do as managers? We don't know what to do, so we just allow it.
Allow
I always
it.
say, yeah,
They'll find
whatever
their
you
way
allow
out.
continues, right?
Yeah.
So her this was her coaching to help with that. Is like, you know what, you have to have that candid conversation. You know, what is it that I'm going to help you with, or what is it that you're going to do to get yourself re-engaged? She said, you know what, you can either stay in joy or leave in peace. There isn't a third option.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like an aha for me. It's like, that's my problem. I gave everybody a third option. If they didn't stay in joy, right, and they didn't leave in peace, yeah, we just continued to work around them. So that was my huge aha moment. So I incorporate a lot of her resources into the trainings that I do.
That's really interesting, because how many people, I mean, there's going to be one in everybody's company, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many people have that, or at least there might be in the next 6 months, you know, where somebody starts disengaging a little bit for one reason or another, because it just forces the conversation of like, this might be my fault. It might have been something I did, but we can't run a business if you're sitting there with your emotions like tying up 50% of your mind during the day.
Mm-hmm. We have to move on.
Yeah.
But we can't make them. They have to choose to change their behavior.
Right.
Oh, I wish I would have had some of this in my early years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's extremely helpful. That's good. That's really good content for our listeners too. And what other parting pieces of advice would you have for somebody that's looking to go in entrepreneurship for themselves in this world?
Surround yourself with the skill sets and the people that you need. Don't think that you can do it all by yourself. And at the end of the day, it's all about working smarter, not harder. And so if you're not good at accounting, and if you're not good at billing and invoicing,
Mm-hmm.
you know what? It pays somebody to do something like that. Don't try to do everything yourself.
Yeah.
And always, you know, I look back to, and one of the things I will say is I was not afraid to admit that I made a mistake, or to say in front of my team that, you know what, that was a really bad idea and it was mine and I'm sorry. And so being able to be vulnerable, apologize sincerely when you need to.
Yeah.
But just realize what your strengths are, and realize what your areas of where you're not so good at, and find somebody else to help you do it.
Yeah.
Don't try to be all things to all people.
Yeah. That's great advice. And I've had a few opportunities to practice that advice that you just gave, and it's phenomenal advice, especially from I think a lot of people when they're young leaders, they like to get in some sort of like a power trip scenario where they're afraid to apologize or something like that. That's been, you know, you're not supposed to have all the answers. You surround yourself with a team that hopefully between all of you has all of the answers, but you yourself are not supposed to have it. And I think that's a really good way of putting it.
You know, one comment that I train on from time to time is, you know, the old adage, well, you can't let them see you sweat. It's like, Are you kidding? Actually, it's okay to let them see you sweat, and it's okay to not have an answer. You'll get back to them, but it's okay to be vulnerable and say, you know what, this is something new. I haven't come across this. I'm not quite sure, but we'll figure it out together. Or you know what, I will get back to you.
That would suck to always like that's never even entered my mind of like the you always have to have an answer. I've never once put that sort of like pressure on myself. Like, yep, I'm gonna make something up right now. Like I'll just straight up say, I don't know.
And it goes back to the humble, hungry, and smart from Patrick Lencioni. You know, nothing's worse than seeing someone who's just promoted to a manager, and all of a sudden, in their mind, their IQ just went up
Right.
about how many points?
Yep. And
you know what? That's like on that Disney movie when he takes a dive off of the platform because he was trying to impress everybody.
Right.
It's like, no, it's okay to be vulnerable, and just because you got a title change doesn't put that crown on you.
Yeah.
And people will see through that really, really fast, and they won't want to be a part of your team.
Well, and that's just it, is like, if you were with them at that level and then all of a sudden you get promoted, they remember when you were at that level.
And you know what? You're going to have to work through that. Yeah. You've got to take time to earn that trust and earn that respect. It's not just given to you because of a title change.
Yeah. Yeah. I have great examples of that happening with a friend of mine, transitioning from being, quote, one of the guys to then becoming the leader of the guys. Mm-hmm. And that's a very different dynamic because now accountability has to be held.
And you're in the fishbowl too. So trust me, if you're not handling things that you should be handling, everybody else is watching you.
Oh yeah. They're every move you're making is being watched. But that piece is really interesting to me, of how people have to go, like, it's a culture change because you got this person that's like my buddy, he's on the front lines with me or whatever. And then all of a sudden now he's the one responsible for holding me accountable to my goals. Mm-hmm. Well, that changes a lot. As long as, for instance, if I don't hit my goals, it does.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? If you and I worked together and I was promoted to a job that we both applied for, I mean, I think one of the first things I would do is sit down with you and say, Landon, I understand we were both applying for this position. And I realize I got the position. This may not be very comfortable for you right now, but I want you to know that I want this team to be successful. So you tell me how you think we can work together to get past this, because you're a valuable member of the team. And so I really appreciate and want your honest feedback. You have to be genuine, but then you have to really listen.
That's why you get paid to do what you do. That's it though, right? That's it. That's incredible.
People want people to invest in them.
Yeah. And they want to be asked. I think you hit it on the head with asking and saying, what can I actually do to help us get past this like awkward shit that's in the air right now?
Because if you don't address it, it's out there.
Right. So. Yeah. And it's just gonna hinder you. So I think I feel like we covered a lot of really good like workplace dynamic stuff today, because that's the sort of stuff that I think a lot of people just like to skate over the top of because work gets in the way. And they're just like, oh, I'll deal with that later in the back of my mind. But it's sitting there in the room with you, just like that big silver BMW that Cy Wakeman talks about.
And most people that leave their jobs, it's not because they don't like the technical skills they're doing. It's not this. Sometimes mainly it's the culture. Mm-hmm. Some people, I can't stand the person I work for. I have no respect for them. I don't trust them. That's not a good environment to be in.
No.
Sometimes when I do talk to people and they're very vulnerable about their situations, I have to actually say to them sometimes, do you have any control over this? And they're like, no, I don't. Well, you may have to be the one looking at doing something different, because whatever you can control, focus on. But if you can't, don't let it eat you up. Mm-hmm. There are some things that we just have to move on from.
Yeah.
If we can't be the change agent.
Yeah. So if you can't be the change, you have to move on to to a different situation where you can be. Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Well, thank you for this awesome just session of advice. I feel like this was very tactical, this whole conversation. So I appreciate that. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. that's going to do it for another episode of Spark to Fire, guys. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and check us out on Spark to Fire podcast on social. And one thing that really helps us with getting more viewers, more attention is screenshotting the Spark to Fire podcast and then putting that on your Instagram story and tag at Spark to Fire podcast. I'm your host, Landon Rhodes. This is the Spark to Fire podcast, and keep striking.